This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. I would like to start this video off with a disclaimer that it's June and it's the dead period between the end of OTAs and the start of training camp. And that means that there's not much to talk about, which isn't a problem. You know what I mean? Like, there's plenty to talk about when there's technically no news going on. There's position group reviews that we have to do. There's analysis that we could do on players' previous work. There's always something to talk about when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. So when there's no news, technically, it's not a problem for me. But one thing I have learned through this is the kind of news that you do get in dead periods can be not the greatest, right? Because it just doesn't take that much smoke to poke through in June or July. It does not mean that there is no smoke there. It does not mean that there is nothing to the rumors that you're hearing. There have been plenty of times where we hear smoke during dead periods, and then later on it turns into something. The Myles Garrett trade is a perfect example of that, where we heard smoke in that draft dead period that Myles might get traded, especially after the contract thing. Me personally didn't think it was going to happen because I didn't think the Browns would do it. But come June 1st, Myles is traded, right? So sometimes the smoke that pierces through that might be a little bit thinner than the usual smoke that pokes through during more heavy times is something that ends up being true. Sometimes it just ends up being noise. A lot of times it just ends up being noise. I don't know where this one is because this is not the first time I've heard people try to sell me on the idea that the Browns are interested in trading Shedeur Sanders, which, if you read the topic of this video, the thumbnail, that's what this is about, right? And that's the thing that makes me pay a little bit more attention to it than usual, right? I remember there being noise at the end of training camp about the Browns potentially trading Shedeur Sanders. And the Browns at that point weren't interested. There had been some noise during the offseason about potentially trading Shedeur Sanders, but nothing had manifested. Nobody really was willing to offer much. And then now we're hearing noise about it again. And it's worth pointing out that this is Andrew Berry's Cleveland Browns we're talking about. And Andrew Berry last offseason traded 2 quarterbacks for 5th-round picks that were on his active roster, right? Now, if we look at this quarterback room, he cannot trade Deshaun Watson because the contract makes him pretty much untradeable. So essentially, the quarterback that you can trade is either Dylan Gabriel, who I'm not sure holds any value, and Shedeur Sanders, who I don't know where the Browns value him at. But that's what we're hearing. We're hearing that the Browns are interested in trading Shedeur Sanders. If you're asking me what I think good compensation for Shedeur Sanders would be, it'd be a 4th-round pick. If you got a 4th-round pick back for Shedeur, I would say you got pretty much your investment back and you made a little money, right? Browns traded 2 6th-round picks to get back into the 5th round to take Shedeur Sanders. I think the 2 6th rounds, the 5th round that you took Shedeur with, all that investment kind of averages into a 4th-round pick. And if you can get a 4th-round pick back for Shedeur Sanders, I think you'd be pretty happy with that. My gut tells me that this is going to be the Andrew Berry special if they trade Shedeur Sanders, right? The good old classic Andrew Berry special. And if you followed this team, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some kind of pick swap for Shedeur Sanders involving like a 5th and 6th round pick swap, maybe a 5th and 4th round pick swap or something like that. But it would likely be a pick swap for Shedeur Sanders. So if you're wondering what the realistic compensation for Shedeur Sanders, I've seen people already online go crazy. Well, he's a former Pro Bowler. You should get a second round pick. It's like, okay, he's not getting a second round. If Andrew Berry gets a second round pick for Shedeur Sanders, I will let go of my disappointment about the Myles Garrett trade and the compensation involved in that. Like, if he's able to get it, all right, Andrew, we good. Like, you made up for it at that point. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think what is most likely is that if, and this is a big if, Shedeur gets traded, we're talking about at best a fourth round pick, which might become interesting if you think about what the Browns might be planning to do if they trade him. But at best, the fourth round pick, more than likely the Andrew Berry special, 5th round, 6th round pick swap, 5th round, 4th round pick swap. Something along those lines, some kind of creative trade where Andrew can say he got a headline asset back for a player, while also not really giving up much or having another team not give up too much in the process. That's the Andrew Berry special. But the compensation is only one factor of this conversation. A lot of you might be wondering, why would the Browns trade Shedeur Sanders? And this is a question I have too, because on one hand, I can understand it if they go a certain direction, but if that's not the direction that they go, then this is a lot more confusing. We'll talk about that, but first I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules, just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game's going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. Okay, so why in the world would the Browns want to trade Shedeur Sanders? Some people, this is not hard for them to explain. Some people are excited about this idea. To other people, they are furious at the thought of this, right? Because the opinions on Shedeur Sanders as a prospect are about as wide-ranging for any prospect that I have seen in quite some time, especially one that's not a first-round pick, right? There are people who are dead set in their belief that Shedeur is going to be a franchise quarterback. There are people who are dead set in their belief that Shedeur is terrible at football and should not play for the Cleveland Browns anymore. I've been frustrated with this whole conversation because nobody seems to be interested in any semblance of nuance talking about Shedeur. Basically, if you want the too long didn't read on my opinion of Shedeur Sanders, I think he's a talented player. I think he has a lot of flaws in his game, and I think people are underestimating how much time and opportunity it's going to take for him to fix those flaws in his game, and if that's guaranteed to happen for him, given where he got selected in the draft. I think he's on more of a journeyman timeline, and then maybe he turns it around and has a Geno Smith run later in his career. I've comped him to Teddy Bridgewater. Again, somebody who, if he sticks around in the league long enough, gets enough opportunities, I think one day maybe things align and he does play some quality football, because there is legitimate talent there. There's a reason why I thought he was a second to late first grade when he came out of Colorado. But also, in watching him play in the pros, I've seen a lot of the warts in his game get magnified that kind of justified why NFL teams just weren't as high on him as I was, as somebody who evaluates through the internet, right? Like, there's game management stuff that Shedeur seems to struggle with. How he goes through plays just does not really align with what you want a quarterback and his process to look like. The big play hunting and the lack of discipline in his game as a quarterback, as far as his pocket mechanics and his progressions, has left a lot to be desired when you watch Shedeur. And can he grow out of these things in his game? Yes. But will it happen quickly? More than likely it won't. But let's get back to the topic on hand, right? That's my opinion of Shedeur. Why would the Browns want to trade him? Well, one, they don't believe in him. That's the first reason, right? And they believe that what they can get back for Shedeur is more valuable than Shedeur itself. I think the number for that is about a 4th-round pick. I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns had a lower number than I have, right? Maybe they think it's worth a 5th-round pick if they just get their money back. That seems to be more like it. I think there are some things that they need to worry about if they do trade Shedeur Sanders. One, are you bringing in anybody else to be the insurance policy for Deshaun Watson? Because as much as I think the conversation of Shedeur is frustrating, I don't want to put the team's entire fate into Deshaun Watson's hands again. I feel like that's a recipe for disaster, a rather obvious recipe for disaster if the Browns were to do that. You know, it's like we've done this before. If he falls apart, if his body falls apart, then what? So what are we replacing Shedeur with, right? That's got to be the question. What's the pivot point here? A lot of people are pointing to the supplemental draft. As we get closer to this, maybe the noise about trading Shedeur gets louder as the Browns' interest in Brendan Sorsby gets louder. Now, I've talked about this before. You're going to hear right now, right in June, in middle to late June, everybody talk like they're not interested in Brendan Sorsby, right? Everybody talk about like, oh, no, this, that, the third, right? But the closer and closer we get to his pro day, the more noise you're going to hear that more people are interested in him, right? The truth is about right here with Brendan Sorsby. Like, let's say the microphone is the middle, but the spectrum that we're going to be on where people think the truth is, it's here right now where people are like very low on him. It's going to swing all the way up to here during his pro day where people are going to be like, oh, 2nd-round pick. And then it's probably going to pop back here to the middle at 3rd-round pick. So there's going to be a wave here that people are going to ride with Brendan Sorsby as we get to his pro day. And I do think the Browns, I don't know if they're interested in Brendan Sorsby as in like they know they're going to bid, but I do think they're intrigued by the idea of Brendan Sorsby, which means that they're going to do their due diligence. Now, this sounds very familiar to me. I don't know if you guys have caught it, but it sounds very, very, very familiar to me. Because remember, in 2021, after Baker Mayfield's disaster of a season, he had a blow up with the team. They were questioning his maturity, questioning his ability to lead the team, questioning whether they wanted to pay him or not. All of that frustration was boiling, and it got the Browns to the point to where they were willing to entertain the idea of looking at Deshaun Watson, because they wanted to move on. They didn't want to pay Baker Mayfield. And that pissed off Baker Mayfield, which made the situation even more untenable than it already was, because it wasn't at a very tenable place at the end of that season, which led to where we are today. I'm going to do a whole video on just how everything is broken down at that position with Andrew Berry. And that's probably going to drop tomorrow morning, more than likely, or maybe tomorrow afternoon. But that's a very interesting video. I had a lot of fun writing that. I'll talk more in detail about that there. But basically, this is a similar situation, right? Shedeur and his people are probably not happy to hear that the Browns are interested in Brendan Sorsby in any way, right? They would rather the Browns completely ignore this Brendan Sorsby, much like how Baker Mayfield felt like the Browns owed it to him to ignore the Deshaun Watson situation when that became an option available to Cleveland. Here's the thing about Andrew Berry. Y'all got to stop expecting Andrew Berry not to look at options. He's always gonna look at whether you like it or whether I like it. That man is going to keep looking for options, right? I did not like it when he looked for options on Myles Garrett, but he did it anyways, right? I'm not saying this as, oh, Andrew Berry cooks all the time, he's great, dear leader Andrew Berry type shit. I'm saying this as a fair evaluation of Andrew Berry. It's gone in both directions for me, where I like that Andrew is always willing to look at options, but also that pendulum can swing the other way, and he looks for options on players that you would rather him not move. This is how Andrew gets down. Nobody is safe in Cleveland. If there is an upgrade available in the eyes of Andrew Berry, he will at least kick the tires on it. How you feel about that philosophy is how you feel about that philosophy. Me personally, even though it can frustrate me at times, overall, I prefer that than having a GM that sits on his hands, right? So it is what it is for me, right? I'll live with the negative of it, even if sometimes I don't like it, right? Like, I really don't like it. I don't like that we didn't bring back Nick Chubb. I get it, though. I don't like that we traded Myles Garrett. I get it, though. But overall, that's what the philosophy is. So when it comes to somebody like Shedeur, there should be no surprise, especially when Shedeur is not in the same spot that Baker Mayfield was in. Like, Baker Mayfield had been the starter for 4 years. Baker Mayfield had made a Pro Bowl legitimately as the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. I know that Shedeur has made a Pro Bowl, but like, his Pro Bowl, him making the Pro Bowl was the catalyst for people to not take the Pro Bowl seriously. Like, it was not a legitimate Pro Bowl appearance. But there's not anybody who is objective who will tell you that Shedeur legitimately earned that Pro Bowl nod, right? But anyways, Baker was legitimately somebody who made a Pro Bowl, somebody who I think he was close to making. Maybe he was an alternate in 2020, but he played well enough to where it made sense. He got to the playoffs. Like, he was in a much better spot. He was the number 1 overall pick here. Shedeur is not in that same spot. So, like, if he is just as mad as Baker was when the Browns look at Deshaun Watson, like, I didn't think it was really that justified when Baker did it back in 2022. I thought Baker should have understood the situation he was in, and he kind of put himself in with how he handled the injury. But people can debate about that. There was more of a debate there. There's really no debate here that Shedeur should feel entitled to the starting job when he's literally in a competition for it right now. And it's up in the air whether he's winning that competition or not. So if this is the catalyst for him requesting a trade, he's definitely going to get moved out. But anyways, it does remind me of that situation. Except for like every player involved in it is much worse, right? Like Baker Mayfield, Shedeur is no Baker Mayfield of 2020. Brendan Sorsby's not what Deshaun Watson was at that time either. I do find this to be a completely interesting situation, the Shedeur trade rumors. I think it only makes sense if you pull the trigger on Brendan Sorsby. If you pull the trigger and win on Brendan Sorsby. So if you bid the 3rd round pick, you bid the 4th round pick, and you get Brendan Sorsby, then okay, you got to get rid of somebody. And if Shedeur is the guy that you could ship off with the most value, because you can't trade Deshaun, nobody wants to trade for Dylan Gabriel, and nobody wants to trade for Taylor Green, then that makes sense. Somebody does have to go, and you would rather get something back for the player that goes, then maybe you could trade Shedeur and then just move on with everything, right? And then, put Brendan Sorsby in that spot that Shedeur was in, develop him, let Deshaun start the season, and then eventually Sorsby would take over. Would that be better than what the Browns could have with Shedeur? I think potentially. There's a potential there. Sorsby is certainly a better athlete, certainly better arm talent. As far as the ability to play the quarterback position at the next level, I think that's going to greatly depend on his ability to grasp NFL systems, because I think he might fit somewhere where he can play well quicker than other places, right? If you put him under center and throw him in somewhere very traditional, I don't think he'll be very successful early on. But, the system like Todd Monken's, where they're willing to do a little bit more of the RPO stuff that he did in college, I think there could be some success early on there with him. Obviously, you have the issues with the gambling, the potential suspension that might incur. I think whatever suspension he gets, the Browns are hoping that would probably be during the period that they would be playing Deshaun Watson anyways. It's also worth noting that even if Brendan Sorsby does get suspended, he still gets all of his training camp. He still gets to practice for the majority of that time. So developmentally, he really wouldn't be missing out on anything. And you would have Dillon Gabriel for cheap on the roster to manage the backup duties, which is fine, right? That's legitimately what Dillon Gabriel is projected to be coming out the draft. So even if he's suspended, I think they have contingencies in place. The real question is, how does the Browns' research go with Brendan Sorsby? The on-the-field stuff, I think it's obvious you can see places where Brendan Sorsby would be a fit as a prospect talent-wise for the Cleveland Browns. I don't think you have to make a stretch for that possibility. The big question with him is, do they think he is mature? Do they think he is the type of person that they want to give a second chance to and give an opportunity to in this locker room? I know a lot of people are real sensitive about what kind of personalities the Browns can bring in because they're this early in their development. But the Browns haven't been shy about giving people second opportunities. They gave Deshaun Watson a second opportunity in 2022. Quincy Judkins, they've been very open about giving him a second opportunity after his situation that slowed his start in 2025. Isaiah Bond is somebody else that got another opportunity. And you can make the argument whether they were convicted of these things or not, whether they were found guilty of these things or not. But the reality is that Brendan Sorsby's situation is not that dissimilar from those guys' situation when it comes to a second chance. Brendan Sorsby was accused of doing something. Whether he did it to the extent that people are saying he did it, we're not really evaluating that. All that really matters is that he's been accused of it. The same way that it's happened with Isaiah Bond, it's happened with Mike Hall, it's happened with Quincy Judkins, and it hasn't stopped the Browns from giving those guys opportunities to contribute. And if they feel like Brendan Sorsby is somebody who, if they give a second opportunity to, will be a positive member of the locker room, then they might be willing to bid for his services, and that might be the chain reaction that causes Shedeur Sanders to get traded. That's my thoughts on this whole situation. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.